Welcome to the Boxing Source Podcast, where we go over the latest news in boxing and react to all of the fights that happened in the past week. Now, let's go to our host, J.R. Bell.
Mic check 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Let's get this thing in. Let's get this thing tuned in. Let's get it cracking. What's going on, everybody? We are here for October 26, 2025. The latest edition of the Boston Sports Podcast. Big up to everyone here that's been able to tune in live and those that'll be watching or listening to the replay here for the Boston Sports Podcast. You know, we got a number of things here that we're going to try to tackle here on this particular edition of the Boston Source Podcast. So, you know, we want to talk about what happened there with the heavyweight fight between Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley there at the O2 Arena. And, you know, we also want to see, like, you know, what the ramifications are for that particular matchup. You want to, you know, basically talk about that and more here with this particular edition of the Boston Source Podcast. So I had like a lot to, you know, say about that particular fight because, I mean, you know, a lot of people are talking about the stoppage there when it comes to this, but also, you know, what happened or the ramifications of it because, you know, you're going to have a number of people that feel like the winner of this fight is going to be in prime position to fight for the undisputed heavyweight championship. But the host has some other thoughts in reference to all of that. But we want to get into it. There, like I said, the main event at the O2 Arena there, Joseph Parker versus Fabio Wardley for the WBO interim heavyweight championship. Of course, you had Joseph Parker there that has been a former full champion with the WBO, losing the world title to Anthony Joshua sometime back, man. That was back in 2018. Here we are in 2025, and he had the WBO world title there, you know, from what I would say 2016 until that loss to Anthony Joshua in 2018, right? And just been in the mix in the heavyweight division around the top of that division or floating around the top there for some time now. But, you know, had his loss to Joe Joyce in 2022, but was, you know, building himself back up. Had a very impressive 2023, you know, culminating with his win over Deontay Wilder at the end of 2023. Then scored the win over Zhilei Zhang in March of 2024. And then in his last bout, being able to defeat Martin Bakole there by stoppage in February, right? And we know that, you know, he was slated to, you know, face Daniel Dubois on that fight card in Riyadh on February 22nd. But, you know, you had the whole thing with Dubois getting sick and, you know, Dubois ended up being in the mix to face Olekander Usyk again at Wembley Stadium. So, you know, at least, you know, Joseph Parker was able to have that fight against Martin Bakole, right? But then after that, you know, they had him in a position to be the mandatory challenger for Olekander Usyk and his undisputed championship. Now, Olekander Usyk was able to honor the IBF mandatory facing and defeating Daniel Dubois at Wembley Stadium. But then the next thing up was the WBO title, and the WBO had ordered Olekander Usyk versus Joseph Parker. And Olekander Usyk put in the, you know, the whole thing about him being injured and all that, saying, you know, my back, oh, my back, oh, my back, oh, right? And then, you know, after having that thing honored, so to speak, what did we see? Olekander Usyk, you know, doing dances and twirling around and all that type of stuff, and, you know, doing the MC Hammer and the I don't know, man. He was like, you know, doing the dance and doing the cabbage patch and all this type of stuff, man. Doing a hokey pokey or whatever it is, man. Like I said, to this day, I still don't understand it, right? But even with that being said, you had what was worked out with Joseph Parker facing Fabio Wardley there, like as I mentioned, for the WBO interim championship. You know, going into this bout, man, I felt like, you know, Joseph Parker having the fights that he had over the course of the past, as I was mentioning, there 7 years, going up against the who's who in the heavyweight division, with the exception of maybe Tyson Fury, right, and Olekander Usyk. So, you know, this one was like something to say, okay, now he would be able to have a fight, here another fight this year after having this win over Martin Bakole and stopping Martin Bakole, right? And then you have Fabio Wardley there, going in this particular bout with the an undefeated record or whatnot, being able to get this position that he was able to get there for this WBO interim championship. But and I was like, man, I don't even know like if he it almost seemed like he was kind of like put in that position because like people within boxing circles wanted him to be there. You know what I mean? But even with that being said, he was still able to get this opportunity to fight Joseph Parker, right? And for me, it was like, hey, I shoot. To be honest with you, and I was checking this to make sure, like Fabio Wardley wasn't even really ranked there within the WBO rankings. Usually they have, the instance where you add the fighter in the rankings before they have like a fight for the world title or the interim title or something like that. But no, I don't necessarily even see that. All right. So, Fabio Wardley getting this opportunity, I mean, props to him going in there with a record of 19-0-1. Of course, he had that one draw in his first bout against Frazier Clark. And then in the rematch, he knocked him out in one round. It was like easy work. You know what I mean? And then after that, had the bout against Justice Huni in June of this year, was able to score a knockout, victory there with that. And in that one, it looked like, Fabio Wardley was losing that. And then he was able to, come back, have a comeback there and get a knockout victory. And then here against Joseph Parker, well, it pretty much like seemed like it looked like the same story. You feel me? Want to get in my guest here to join in on the conversation for this particular bout that happened between Joseph Parker and Fabio Wardley here. Of course, he has been one of the great analysts here on the Boxing Source podcast here on this thing here. So I got my guy, the Boxing Academic, that's checking in here for this edition of the Boxing Source podcast. Shout out to L Dub Boxing on the live chat here as well. So, like I said, I mean, I checked out this fight. Like I said, I mean, I was, trying to, assess this bout. I had Joseph Parker, favored in this here, so to speak. But, and I thought he was doing, fairly well in a number of the rounds. So I wanted to kind of like get into this thing here when it comes to the round by round analysis, right? Because for me, I felt like it was more of Joseph Parker's experience that kind of like played a part here in this. So I'm gonna see here how this goes. Hopefully, we're able to get my guy, Boxer Academic, in here for this. Otherwise, I'll see if I could get him on through the call in or something like that. Because I might just start the call in if you're having issues there with that. So, while my guy Boxer Academic is trying to go on the check in, I'm just gonna see if I can pull up the joint here for the round by round analysis. You know what I'm saying? My guy Smitty is in the building. Shout out to Smitty here. You know what I'm saying? Props you for jumping in here. Let me see here. Hopefully, my guy Box Academic is able to properly check in, or else I'm going to see if I could, get this thing here with the phone lines to kind of like come through on this sense. So we're going to see if we could get that situated here. So I'm trying to see if the Boxing Academic is able to jump on here if he can. If he's able to hear me there. You're there with me, Boxing Academic? See if he's able to jump in on here. If not, then we're gonna try to get the thing with the phone lines operating on this thing here so that we could get this cracking. You know what I'm saying? All right. So yeah, it looks like he's having the issues there. So I'm gonna see if I could try to get the phone lines to probably jump off here with this as well. So while I get that going, right? So with that being said, right, what we gonna do is we gonna have the thing where I'm gonna just go ahead and do the analyze what's going on with it. My guy L Dub says that he had Wardley in rounds 2, 3, 8, and 10, and had Parker on the on the other one here. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing about it. So we gonna see how that works here on that front because I felt like it was like Parker that was having the lead in this fight, right? Um, and with that being said, right, I had the thing with the first round where I felt like Joseph Parker was going in there landing the jab very early in the bout. When I had him landing the jab, mixing up up and down as far as like being able to connect with the jab. He threw like combinations at times, the basic 1-2. At the end of the round, it looked like he was trying to land with that right hand and kind of like threw a flurry there on Fabio Wardley there before the end of the round, you know. And, from that, I kind of like seen like it was something where he was trying to figure out where his range was against Fabio Wardley. And, once he was trying to throw the jab and kind of like was a little bit active with the jab, then that would have, worked for him, here over the course of the fight, you know. But then in round 2, you kind of like seeing Fabio Wardley be the one that was, throwing the jab more often, and that Parker was going in there trying to connect with the counter right hand, you know. But by the end of that second round, you had Fabio Wardley being able to land an uppercut before, like I said, before the end of the round, kind of back up, Joseph Parker a little bit, and that ended up being a huge factor there for this fight. Now going into round 3, had Wardley being able to connect with a good right hand to the body, and also with another right hand upstairs. Before a minute was left in the round. You know what I'm saying? So I probably could have had that lean towards Fabio Wardley getting that particular round. And then with round 4, you kind of seen like a number of feints there with Wardley. Not really throwing a jab. He was just feinting. If you see me here, he was just feinting, but then not actually throwing a jab. But then Parker was throwing and landing the jab himself, and then getting to the body. And then you kind of seen him be more reliant on that counter right hand. So with him, being able to land with the counter right, he was being a bit more successful on that. And round 5, seeing the same thing with Joseph Parker being more successful with the jab, then being able to kind of like as you say, do like a feint, almost like a feint. But if you like start with the left, almost like you're throwing the jab with the left, but then come around it and hook with it, then that threw Fabio Wardley off, right? So, we kind of was mixing up that offense there in that particular round, landing the right hand, but you also seen Wardley kind of, roll with that right hand once he was landing the right hand, Parker was, right? And I think that was like very key over the course of this fight was that Fabio Wardley was getting hit with the right hand, but a lot of times he was rolling with that right hand. So a number of times, if you were watching it live or listen to the commentary on the zone, and in that lead announcer there was like, "Oh, you see Parker with the landing the right hand." Well, Wardley was kind of rolling with that, and I think that was very key. But round 6, you had Parker landing the 1-2, and you had Wardley there a little bit of an issue backing up to the ropes, and even in a back and forth with 30 seconds left in the round, Parker had the better of that exchange. So that was like another round for Joseph Parker. But then like round 7, you seen Wardley landing the right hand, and but then Parker responded with the right hand of his own. But at times, to me though, from those first 6 or 7 rounds, you did see instances where both fighters kind of like waited before they were able to get their offense going, or in order to throw any type of shot. You know what I mean? So it was like, okay, I'm gonna wait for it. I'm gonna wait for it, and then if I see the opening, then I'm gonna go for it instead of just trying to throw, or whatever it is. And as I said earlier, with Joseph Parker, at times, especially when he was backing up, he was like waiting for Fabio Wardley to throw so he could land that counter right hand. Now there were times when it was successful there for Joseph Parker, but at other times you could see like there have been some openings there for Fabio Wardley to take advantage, which it ended up happening later in the fight. Now, for a round eight, you had Joseph Parker trying to do the 1-1-2, as I say, the double jab and in the right hand. But the thing is, like a lot of times, either you would have Fabio Wardley block a number of the shots, or you would have Joseph Parker missing those shots at times. And as I mentioned before, there are times when like both fighters could be out of range when throwing those shots. It was like I don't know if it was like timing or whatever it is, but there are some instances where a number of the punches like didn't land on anything, like not the arm, not the up top, not to the body or nothing, because they were like at least like a couple of inches out of range or something like that. So there are a few things that both fighters could have been able to take advantage of if they were just a little bit more sharper, especially early in the fight, right? Now, round nine, I would say, both fighters kind of were seeing that it was getting pretty close into this particular bout. Parker, I felt like was, being more active, particularly early in round nine, throwing like a flurry there, on Fabio Wardley, but really didn't affect Wardley that much. He responded, Wardley did, with the right hand, upstairs, but Parker was able to, do a good job as far as like rolling with that punch. Now Parker was able to, connect with a big right of his own there also, but it didn't like do enough to completely change the momentum there in the fight. Now round 10 was the key part where like Parker, was able to try to, bounce or kind of like really get the most out of Fabio Wardley. But then once he kind of like let off of the gas a little bit and then was backing himself up and then went back to like the counter stage, that's when he, allowed Wardley to be able to, throw with his offense. And then Wardley catches him with the uppercut. And while, Parker was trying to get himself off of the ropes. And when he was getting himself off of the ropes, he kind of stumbled a little bit. And then that opened up, the opportunity for Fabio Wardley to throw a flurry of punches there on that front. You know what I'm saying? So with that being said, that kind of like turned the tide there for round 10 in favor of Fabio Wardley there, and then for that, then we will see how this thing goes here on this thing. Let's see. So then we get to like round 11, and then with that, you kind of like seeing there where you had the flurry by Fabio Wardley, and then you see the thing there with referee Howard Foster, going in there and stopping the fight. So there you go, there you have it. You know what I mean? And so that's what it was, man. A TKO victory for Fabio Wardley. He is now 20-0-1, now with 19 wins by way of knockout. There, Joseph Parker, having the fourth loss of his professional career, 36-4. And now you have Fabio Wardley as the WBO interim heavyweight champion. I want to see here if I could try to get my guy on here for this conversation. I'll see if we could just try to, get this here. I'm not sure what's going on to get this, to get my guest on here, because I know that he wanted to talk about, this fight. So let me see here if I could, get him on the line here for a little bit. Let's see if we can get it back on the mix here. So let me see how this goes. So let's see how this run. Let me see here. So I'm going to try to see if I can get my guy on. But yeah, this it was probably better off if I just did off this joint. Nah, we gonna have to do it another way. I'm gonna have to hit my guy direct on this. So let's get my guy, the box academic, on the line here a little bit. So I don't know what's going on with this thing on this front. So let's see if we can do it on it. So here we go. We gonna get Mr. Grady on here. Yo, Mike.
Yes, sir. What's going on, VR?
Yo, what's happening, man?
Nothing much, nothing much. Is this a talk show?
Yeah. You on with the Boston Source podcast, man. So yeah, man, let's talk about the thing here with Parker and Wardley, man, and just went through it round by round. I thought it was like pretty close, but had Parker like edging the fight until the fight got stopped by the referee there. So what did you think about the fight?
I definitely think the fight was close. Obviously, in the beginning, I hear me echoing. I don't know if that's on your side also.
Probably on my side. I think it is. Hold on. I'll probably just adjust the volume joint on it. We should be good.
Yeah. So, obviously, I'm still echoing, but I'm going to keep talking.
Okay, for sure.
Round two that Wardley had, both of them hurt each other. But when Wardley hurt Parker, he kind of had a sustained attack. And then after that, maybe after round 4 or so, it seemed like Wardley couldn't move his head from the left hook, the lead left hook, or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was definitely a close fight. At times, in the middle of the fight, I was questioning if Wardley wanted to quit. Like, it was one time where his coach was feeling like he was like trying to give him a morale boost.
Yeah.
And, like that happens, right? But I don't think they should have stopped the fight. And I looked at the stoppage a couple of times. I think you have to give Joseph Parker the benefit of the doubt in that moment. Because everybody gets hurt, everybody has to survive. You got to give them the benefit of the doubt. And so, yeah, I mean, Joseph Parker is very gracious in defeat, but I think he was winning the fight. He was winning sort of the spirit of the fight. It was a close fight, but he was winning it. You got to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, most definitely. You got to give him that, especially if he's the champion going into it. Like he's a WBO interim champion, and I mean it's the 11th round, so you never know with what could potentially happen, or at least give like something like a standing 8 count. At the very least, you could give a standing 8 count, and the referee Howard Foster didn't even do that. So I'm like, come on, like how are you gonna just have it to the point where, oh no, let's just go ahead and stop the fight and have it waved off because you think that Joseph Parker was in serious trouble where I don't even know if he was kind of like seriously hurt on that front. You know what I mean? I mean, for me it was more about Wardley's when he was landing punches at that time, it was like more accurate than Parker at certain points of the fight. So I kind of like think that yeah, maybe it did affect Parker at times, but not to the point where Howard Foster should have stepped in and stopped the fight.
So Parker was definitely hurt. At the same time, Wardley was dog tired. So if you give Parker an 8 count, Wardley does not recover. Like he was even questioning himself how many more punches he could throw. It would have been an even better fight. Like if you let Parker like try to survive, we probably would have saw. We would have saw another action, another swing in the action.
Yeah, I mean, because we've seen what happened at the end of the 10th round with those two, because with Parker being able to land a couple of right hands, he had like Wardley in trouble, and then after a little bit of a break or something like that, where Parker kind of stepped back a bit, then you seen Wardley come back and land that uppercut, and when he landed the uppercut, then you've seen how the momentum was swinging back into Wardley's favor. So by the time the end of that round happened, yeah, some people would have thought that like Parker was kind of like in trouble, but he still should have had that benefit of the doubt to kind of like see if he'd be able to get back into the fight.
Yeah, you gotta give him that opportunity. As the champion, as you said, as the more mature fighter, like fighters are gonna be exposed to danger. He wasn't at a risk of like having brain damage. Like it wasn't that bad. Like I know Wardley throws big shots, but quite a few of them didn't land. A few of them did land.
Yeah.
He was buzzed, but what fighter doesn't get buzzed and have to survive?
Right. That's the thing about it is like you had both of these fighters getting buzzed up. Both of the fighters, having the thing where they were getting stunned or they stumbled a little bit after a punch. But, at one point, like I said, with Parker, he had Wardley stumbling for a little bit and then he threw a flurry and it didn't really, kind of like count as much as it did. I think it was just the major difference was with Wardley was that when Wardley had Parker stumble in the end of the 10th round, he was able to land more punches there with his flurries and be, more precise. But still, as we said, you got to give, these fighters the benefit of the doubt, especially in a heavyweight fight like that. But as I mentioned, Howard Foster has been known for, having some real questionable stoppages.
Yeah, I can see. It leads me to my Nostradamus prediction, and I don't know if you've already spoken on it, so I'll wait till after you bring it up.
Nope, I haven't spoken about it yet. So,
Okay, I'll follow.
okay. So, with this being the result, therefore, Parker versus Wardley, and Wardley being able to get the win and now becoming the new WBO interim championship or the WBO interim champion, right? That kind of could affect the plans there as far as like the World Boxing Organization goes. As I was mentioning for this fight, Parker was initially ordered to face Olekander Usyk, but with Usyk claiming to be injured, that it, kind of like scratched him off for a bout against Joseph Parker, which set up this fight between Parker and Wardley. Now, with Wardley being able to get the win, that could change the whole situation when it comes to the mandatory challenger or the mandatory requirements therefore heavyweight champion Olekander Usyk. Okay. Now, for one, Olekander Usyk has already mentioned that he has his team in negotiations for a fight that's going to be taking place sometime early next year. So, if that's going to be the case, then one, I doubt that Fabio Wardley is going to be in the picture because you're not going to have Fabio Wardley coming off of this particular bout and turning right around to face Olekander Usyk just like that. It's not going to happen. Okay. And then two, like I said, I mean, if Olekander Usyk, whether it was an injury or not, wasn't going to face Joseph Parker next, I didn't feel like he was going to be facing Fabio Wardley next because I don't think it's much different than the whole situation of them trying to push for Olekander Usyk to fight Moses Atama. You know what I mean? So if you're gonna say that, oh, Moses Atama isn't necessarily ready for a fight against Olekander Usyk, then what makes anyone kind of think that Fabio Wardley winning the WBO interim championship is going to be there to be right in position to face Olekander Usyk? No, I just don't see that. So that being said, you could, for me, I would write Moses Atama off as the next fight and I would write Fabio Wardley off for this next fight. So that could leave something else in the mix there for Olekander Usyk for his fight that could be taking place here for early next year. Boxing Academic, you have any potential insight on this?
As a matter of fact, JR, I do. I kind of alluded to this last week.
Mm-hmm.
The best fight, the most financially lucrative fight outside of Anthony Joshua, outside of people that he has already fought twice and beat, is Deontay Wilder. He can get the most money, and I'm just being completely honest when I say this. he can get the most money for seemingly the least risk, because he would be favored to win on paper. That's the highest sort of status guy, the most lucrative guy that he can fight and still be highly favored in the fight. You know what I mean? On paper, he can win the fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll do what I wanted it to happen for the longest. It'll give Deontay Wilder one more bite at the apple, one more chance to throw that 1-2 like his life depended on it. To be loose in the fight, and maybe even be losing the fight, and throw 1-2 and land one good shot and get Usyk the fuck out of there. Excuse my language.
It would be, any type of possibility. It would be out there. It would be available, for him, on that sense. As I was mentioning, with all of these potential opponents that could be out there for Olekander Usyk, right? I mean, y'all could go down the line. Moses Atama, come on. Philip Hergovich, nah. Lawrence Okoli, no. I get Cabello, no. Kubrat Pulev already has a fight coming up. All right, he's lined up for a fight in December, so that's going to happen around December 12th. So he's out, right? So y'all could go through the rankings. Y'all could go through all of the fighters that are out there in the rankings. And the thing is like, well, if you have Olekander Usyk, that is a fighter. Yes, he's the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, but he really doesn't have like a home, as they say, a home stadium or anything like that, right? So he's basically been a road warrior for all of these fights that he's had, whether it's in Saudi Arabia or in England or wherever. Why not have a fight one time back in the U.S. defending the undisputed championships against Deontay Wilder? Okay, why not? And then if you get the win, you could say, hey, you know what? Not only did I beat everybody in my era in the cruiserweight division, but I beat everybody in my era in the heavyweight division, including Joshua twice, Fury twice, and Dubois twice. And then you would have Deontay Wilder on there. After that, you couldn't really say anything else about Olekander Usyk in his standing in the heavyweight division, regardless what the status is of Deontay Wilder at this particular point. The only other fighter I would say that maybe could generate any type of interest is if they say Zhilei Zhang over in China or something like that. But they ain't gonna have no fight in no China with Zhilei Zhang. That would be absolutely insane if they tried that. So why not go ahead and have the fight Olekander Usyk versus Deontay Wilder? I don't see like why it couldn't be the case.
And the crazy thing with the outcome yesterday, this is the perfect storm to make the fight. The right set of wrong circumstances have happened to where Usyk Wilder makes sense at this point in Wilder's career. Usyk has 3 fights left. We can't expect him to fight Tyson Fury every time.
Mm-hmm.
He can fight in a fight where he is projected to win. Should be easy win. And he can make some money doing it.
Yep.
Sound like a win.
Yep. I mean, it's not, much different to, the situation, I would say, where like a Lamont Rose Jr., right? Having the WBA title at 130 pounds, and then you had a interim champion there at 130 pounds at one point. But with him, having a fight against Tank Davis, but then, the WBA interim champion at the time lost to Jazza Dickens or James Dickens or whatever it is. So that changed that whole mandatory situation for the WBA. So you don't really see the WBA really calling for the mandatory for that WBA 130-pound title, regardless of the current situation now with Lamont Rose Jr., of course, since he's fighting, Isaac Cruz for the WBC interim championship at 140 pounds, right? So if you can have this particular situation with the WBA, with the interim championship change hands in that instance, here you got it happening with the WBO interim heavyweight championship. So that kind of gives a little bit more leeway for Olekander Usyk to say, you know what, I don't really have to have that mandatory defense yet, unless the WBO Championship Committee says nope. We still gonna kind of carry those rules over. But I say, why not just have it be extended a little bit? Have Olekander Usyk make one other defense of the undisputed titles, and then it would open up the door for Deontay Wilder to be a potential opponent.
I mean, who else got options for other fighters? Like, who else make more sense outside of Wilder? I mean, like you said, Zane, but like Zane beat Wilder, yes, but Usyk facing Zane could be an interesting fight, but I just think you get more buzz from a Wilder fight. You get a lot more buzz.
So, for those that are like watching live, whether it's on YouTube or Rumble or whatever it is, you can see here on the screen that have the rankings for each of the sanctioning bodies. There, up until, of course, what happened yesterday with Joseph Parker losing that WBO interim championship. So, with all of these other situations that are out there, right? You really don't have a fighter that has the name behind them that Olekander Usyk hasn't faced yet, And I name a lot of these names that are at or around the top of the rankings are there, and nobody kind of like moves the needle outside of Deontay Wilder at this point. So, like, who else would you have Usyk face if it's not going to be like a Tyson Fury, who said that he's retired? Or maybe an Anthony Joshua, but who would want to see that fight a third time? And with Anthony Joshua coming off of surgery, he's not going to have a fight against Olekander Usyk coming right off the bat, so that's not happening either. So I say, why not? You know what I mean? So that's I had there on that front there, and for Fabio Wardley, right? For him getting that win, some people say that it's a controversial win. They say, maybe on the cards that, Joseph Parker was leading or winning on the cards. So if he was able to get through that 11th round and see if he could get through the 12th or maybe have won the 12th, then he could have ended up winning the fight. So you could be able to have the point where, hey, maybe we should push for a rematch between Fabio Wardley and Joseph Parker there, and that would once again open that door for Usyk to be able to face Deontay Wilder early in 2026. So I say, why not go ahead and have that happen on that front?
Yeah, one thing I guess I didn't say, but Wardley has a hard head. He can take some shots.
Yeah.
And the thing though is that what I project, if he ever happens to fight Usyk, Usyk is going to have a field day landing clean shots on him. Like, maybe he might get an opportunity to throw a brilliant shot, but Usyk, like, if Joseph Parker could throw his lead left hand and land that sort of wheel, and then after landing that lead left hand, throw like 3 or 4 shots unanswered, what do you think Usyk gonna do? I get it, it's a different stance, but yeah, he gonna get him clean, and just how much can he take?
It wouldn't be a good. I don't think it would be a good matchup to have at this point here for for Fabio Wardley, in a sense. I think it's not much different than with Moses Atama. Yeah, Moses Atama was able to dispatch of Dylan White within 1 round, but people were like, oh, even with this man, he got all this momentum. 20 years old, he's ready to fight Olekander Usyk right now. No, we can't necessarily be like putting these guys out there, immediately. Like you got. I think they have a great opportunity to have another instance of where you could have Fabio Wardley there going against Moses Atama. Undefeated versus undefeated. These guys, coming up in the ranks there in the heavyweight division, and you want to see like where they are as far as like their professional careers are concerned. To me, I would rather have that happen than to go ahead and push one of these guys to go up against Olekander Usyk right now. Because yeah, you may say that Olekander Usyk says that he's going to fight until he's 41 years old. But in boxing, there are no guarantees. So are y'all going to completely bank on Olekander Usyk being able to fight for these titles for 3 more years? No. And, there's some instances where, like, as an undisputed champion, going after mandatory against mandatory against mandatory, sometimes those things don't really make too much sense. And here in this instance, a fight between Olekander Usyk and Fabio Wardley right now, I don't think really make much sense. I would say that also with the Agit Cabello. Cabello has been, very impressive over his past few fights, but I don't think right now that would be a fight that kind of like, gets the interest of fight fans. You know what I'm saying? Like they would put it in Saudi Arabia or something like that. But outside of that, like who would be able to invest into a fight between Olekander Usyk and Agit Cabello? Not that very many people, right? So why not have the opportunity to have Olekander Usyk fight once again in the United States against someone like Deontay Wilder? Why not? So that's why I say you have this be the case of Deontay Wilder having one shot to fight for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. So there you go. You know what I mean?
And the thing is, everybody you name, there's nothing really in it for Usyk outside of Deontay Wilder. Cabello, like you said, he has had an impressive run, but I ain't trying to be funny. Unless he does something after Usyk retires, I don't think a lot of people are gonna remember him. I'm not trying to be funny. He has had an impressive run, but people will remember Deontay Wilder, whether good, bad, and different. They will remember Deontay Wilder. And Usyk having him on his record, it just adds to Usyk's legitimacy. I mean, we already know he's the best heavyweight of this era, but it adds to the legitimacy of him saying how good would he have been in other eras. It adds to that other conversation. How good is he all time type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So I mean, because having a win over like a Agit Cabello, really wouldn't hold, as much weight, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? He doesn't have the name behind it. He doesn't necessarily have the accolades that, Deontay Wilder has. Deontay Wilder has at least been the WBC heavyweight champion and had his run as a WBC heavyweight champion. So, with that being said, regardless of, what Deontay Wilder did in his, last fight over in Kansas, you still have that being the name of Deontay Wilder. So why not go ahead and have that, take place? Especially with Olekander Usyk saying that, hey, he's in negotiations for a fight, to happen, here by the early part of 2026. And with Deontay Wilder, saying that he's lined up for a fight himself, around that same time, why not pair those two together? You feel me?
And the beautiful thing is that Usyk can have the claim to fame to have retired all of the other champions in his time period.
Yeah, you can pretty much say that. He can pretty much make that claim. It like you were talking about with the his standing in like heavyweight history, like you wouldn't be able to think about any of the fighters out of the past 25, 30 years or so that kind of like would say, hey, I beat like everybody that there is to beat within my particular era, with the exception of maybe Lennox Lewis, but Lewis didn't necessarily face Riddick Bowe or something like that, or a few other guys out there in the heavyweight division. So, but Usyk, at least Usyk was able to say, "Hey, I fought these guys that were either former world champions or were world champions when I was able to fight them and beat them." You know what I mean? So, Usyk will be able to have that, on his docket, for his overall resume in his professional career.
And when I say retire, I mean legitimately retire, because yes, okay, the guy's coming back, but Joshua was feigning quitting after losing to Usyk. Big said he retired, and then if Usyk beat Wilder, the basically responsible thing to do is to retire. So he would very likely retire too if he loses to Usyk.
Yeah. So that would be the thing there for Usyk, and he would kind of like also later claim to being the best fighter of this era. A number of people are saying that maybe it could be Terrence Crawford right now, or like they say, fighter of the decade. We're kind of like closing to like 5 or 6 or so years in, and some people are saying maybe it could be Terrence Crawford being a 3-division undisputed champion or whatever it is. But with Olekander Usyk being able to fight and defeat the top fighters in the cruiserweight and heavyweight divisions, respectively, he could definitely have a claim also. With him saying that, you know what I mean. So there you go on that front. But that was mainly what we had as far as like action from yesterday. Of course, we could have had Keith Thurman versus Sebastian Fundora, but Fundora claimed the injury there with his hand, or had suffered an injury with his hand. So that whole fight card for October 25th in Las Vegas, that was pretty much like done and shot down and all that type of stuff there, right? So that's why we only had the thing there with the heavyweight fight over at the O2. Next weekend, I have to see if there's like anything for next weekend. I don't really see much for that. But the following weekend, we have the fight card that will be in Fort Worth, Texas, headlined by Virgil Ortiz Jr. versus Erickson Lubin for Virgil Ortiz interim WBC super welterweight title. But the story from this weekend is that the co-feature bout between Floyd Schofield and Joseph JoJo Diaz looks like it's going to be scrapped because Floyd Schofield injured his hand. Let's see here, man. I'm gonna see if I could share this thing here, share the screen on the live here real quick, because I'm gonna go ahead and post what Golden Boy had on here, right? They put this here not that long ago, right? It said on Thursday, October 23rd, Floyd Schofield Jr. sustained a grade 2 sprain to his right wrist, which included minor ligament damage. Following medical evaluation and on the advice of his team, Schofield has been forced to withdraw from his scheduled bout against Joseph JoJo Diaz on Saturday, November 8th. Golden Boy wishes him a full and speedy recovery. Well, there you go. You had Floyd Schofield Jr., who is ranked number 1 in the WBA in the lightweight division. Of course, had his first round knockout over Tevin Farmer. And folks wanted to see what would be next there for Floyd Schofield Jr. But then they lined him up here with JoJo Diaz to be part of that fight card. But now that's all but that is scrapped. And who knows, man, what's going to be happening here with Floyd Schofield. Because remember, Floyd Schofield was in line to face Shakur Stevenson on February of this year, February 22nd. And then you had the whole thing about him getting sick or whatever it is, and him being that whole bout being scrapped, or him, being out of that fight card. Now this happens. It's kind of like a good amount of bad luck there for Floyd Schofield. Now, there's been some little buzz of sorts that maybe he could be in line to fight for a world title next year. Um, I'm not all too sure about that. It depends on the situation with the WBA champion. Of course, it's Tank Davis, but I just don't see where the path would be for Floyd Schofield to kind of like fight for world title there on that front. So I got to see how that works. But I think this is like with a couple of weeks ahead or to go here for that fight card in Fort Worth, Texas. That's like a bad break of sorts there for Floyd Schofield not to have that fight with JoJo Diaz. I mean, a lot of people would have favored Floyd Schofield to get that win anyway, but now with him kind of like having this injury, I guess that puts him out of commission here for a good amount of months. Kind of like is a bad little situation there on that front for Floyd Schofield Jr. But yeah, that kind of makes that card be real diminished of sorts. So I think a number of people will just be looking forward to the main event there on that front. Any reaction there from you, Boxer Academic, about that news of Floyd Schofield being injured?
I was just referring fans essentially question Schofield and his father sort of they was questioning something. I didn't read into it a lot, but they were like here we go again type of thing. And you can tell me where that potentially comes from, but that's what I saw. I saw a couple people saying that.
Yeah.
Like, here we go again.
Yeah. The thing with the Shakur Stevenson situation, that one was like handled really crazy because you had the whole instance of where they were supposed to be flying out to, I think it was England or something like that, to kind of like promote that fight with Stevenson, and they didn't make it because there was some type of issue with their passports. And I'm like, what? And then the situation happened with February 22nd, and them saying like, oh, he got supremely sick or whatever it is. How like a number of fighters kind of had some issues there during fight week, right? So they kind of like said, oh, we can't do it because like he's really sick and trying to do this. Where some people may have thought that it was mainly that Schofield at the time really was having issues getting the weight down, But yeah, the way that was handled, and then you had the fight with Tevin Farmer. Okay, that's cool. But then now you have this where you could have had like something where you stay busy, stay active here in 2025, get a fight against JoJo Diaz, who had a good little effort in his last bout, right? But now, since you're not able to get that fight in, you only have one fight this year, and that's it. So I'm like, that's not a good look, especially when you have a JoJo Diaz that's coming off of his bout against Regis Prograis. That was just a couple of months ago. And that fight was north of 135 pounds. So you weren't necessarily guaranteed that JoJo Diaz may have been at a good condition to get down to around that 135-pound range, or even maybe a couple of pounds over still. So you could have had that momentum first off of a win over Tevin Farmer. Then you could get a fight here with JoJo Diaz, and then go into 2026 being like, okay, now let's see where we could position Floyd Schofield in the lightweight division and see how he would contend for a world title. Now with this injury, depending on the level of severity of it, he could be out for, maybe 2-3 months before he could get back in the gym. So that's that particular situation right there. You know what I mean? But I would say like that fight card there for November 8th, we'll see how, things get sorted out with that. I don't know if they're going to have JoJo Diaz in a fight, during that fight card. I mean, he's a Golden Boy fighter himself. So, maybe they could work something out with him. But, with that thing is a real interesting situation on that front. You know what I mean? Um, also, I mean, with the main event too, just going through that real quick. You got Virgil Ortiz Jr. defending the WBC interim championship at 154 against Erickson Lubin. And I've said it once they announced it. People keep sleeping on Erickson Lubin, and I don't know why they're doing that, especially with Virgil Ortiz Jr. We don't know his situation, coming off of his injury, and this was something I was going to talk about. Don't know his situation about his injury, because we had the fight that he had against Madrimov in February. Then they said, hey, we gotta scale back a little bit because he's injured. And so, once he, got something where he's back, then you have him in this fight against Erickson Lubin. And Erickson Lubin has, fought, undefeated fighter against and another undefeated fighter back to back. And now this is going to be his third consecutive bout against an unbeaten fighter. They pretty much like wrote him off before his fight against Jesus Ramos in 2023. And then after that, he goes up against Arjo Holmes Jr. and gets the stoppage win there for that. So now he's like, really in a good spot going up against Virgil Ortiz Jr. to get back in the mix there at 154 pounds. I think that, Virgil Ortiz can't slip around or kind of like play around here in this particular instance against Erickson Lubin. Here, because that's pretty much going to be the fight to look out for here over these next couple of weeks. We pretty much like have like a week off or something like that in the fight game. There's going to be some fights over in Orlando, Florida, and also in like Manchester. But that's the one that like a lot of fight fans are focusing on there for these next couple of weeks there, man. Academic, you got any more on Ortiz versus Erickson Lubin?
Will be interesting. The fact that objects in motion stay in motion and objects at rest stay at rest.
Yeah.
And so, with the amount of sort of non-motion that we have seen from Ortiz, will that be enough to give Lubin the edge that he needed? Because on the equal footing, both of them healthy, both of them, ready to go, then you obviously got to lean toward Ortiz. Because that style of pressure fighter has seemed to be Lubin's sort of Achilles heel, at least in some instances when you face the higher tier of pressure fighters. And so with what has happened with Ortiz, will that be enough to give Lubin what he needs to be, just that right amount of slickness that he can be above Ortiz? And essentially, really make Ortiz miss all night. Mm-hmm. And can he do that on a consistent basis? And if he can, he'll win. And if he throws in hard shots in the middle of making him misses, it could be very interesting. And what I will say, I do recall there was one fight with Ortiz where it might have been just a bad performance, but I was asking like, if it came down to it, would Ortiz bite down? I don't remember what fight that was, but that's what I remember from there.
I mean, you had like the instance where he was fighting Sergey Boachuk, where he was knocked down early in that fight in the first round, and then you had like stuff going down within the 6th and 7th round, but then he got caught once again in the 8th round. And when he got caught in the 8th round, then he kind of like turned it up a notch and that type of stuff. But it ended up being like a majority decision win for him. But a number of people felt like he lost that fight against Sergey Boachuk. So going off of that and then turning around and having a fight against Israel Madrimov on February 22nd, that was kind of a little bit of a better performance there on that front from Virgil Ortiz Jr. But then at the same time, we said that, hey, I had like some issues there with, I think it was his hand or something like that after the fight. So now we got to see like where he's at as far as like this is concerned, because we had, of course, the situation that had him out of action for all of 2023. Dealing with rhabdo or the weight issues there, and then now having this campaign here at 154 pounds, going up against like a Frederick Lawson, Thomas Delorme, Surrey Boachuk, and Israel Madrimov. Now he's going up against a fighter Erickson Lubin, of course, fought for the world title early in his career, had the loss suffered there against Mel Charlo, and then had the bout that he had against Sebastian Fundora where he ended up getting stopped. But now coming off of that, 3 consecutive wins, he's looking like, okay, this is like, my real shot to get back in the mix there at 154 pounds. And if he gets this win here against Virgil Ortiz Jr. for the WBC interim title, then he could, get back against those guys like a Sebastian Fundora or maybe a, fight against against Bakr Murtazaliev or something like that. So we'll see how that goes. But that's kind of like the situation here for this fight. A lot on the line for both fighters and things like that. And then there's like a lot that's been talked about for both of these fighters, particularly with Virgil Ortiz Jr. A lot of there's been talk about him potentially fighting Jerome Boots Ennis in 2026, or some other fights that could be there that could be lined up for Virgil Ortiz Jr. on that front. You know what I mean? But the other part about Virgil Ortiz Jr. that I was going to talk about was me mentioning Sebastian Fundora, because Sebastian Fundora is the WBC champion in 154 pounds, and yes, he was supposed to be in line to face Keith Thurman. That was supposed to happen yesterday in Las Vegas, but his injury kind of like put him out of commission for that particular date. So they're going to end up rescheduling that, right? But with Virgil Ortiz Jr. being the WBC interim champion, some would think that he should be right there or right in line or be the mandatory challenger for Fundora's WBC championship, right? And that Virgil Ortiz had the WBC interim championship since 2024 when he had the win over Surrey Boachuk. But here's the issue with that. If y'all were saying that Virgil Ortiz Jr. was injured after his fight against Israel Madrimov, then where was the petition for him to fight for the world title against Sebastian Fundora, which is kind of interesting. Like, and this was, I guess this came up here on one interview or something like that, that dealt with Virgil Ortiz Jr.'s trainer, Robert Garcia, right? And he kind of said something to the effect of the WBC doesn't call out the mandatory, which they should have done 2 fights ago, where Fundora has to fight Virgil. And that he criticized the WBC for not making Fundora versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. But as I was mentioning, wait a minute. So Virgil Ortiz Jr. has this fight with Israel Madrimov, defends the WBC interim championship, and then they say that there's an injury suffered by Virgil Ortiz Jr. So where would be the instance where the WBC would call for the mandatory to be ordered? And that's what the WBC president mentioned right there. He says, quote, to Robert Garcia, "I'm surprised and disappointed at your statements. You are perfectly aware that Virgil was injured and you are aware of the rules. You have been in boxing for a long time. Virgil is fighting November and defending his WBC interim title, making good money. Simply can't understand why you're attacking the WBC." Well, there you go. So if either you or your promoters or managers or whatever it is were saying that he was injured, Virgil Ortiz, what I'm talking about, if he was injured, then he wouldn't have had any instance where he could have fought Sebastian Fundora or any of these top level, opponents that were out there in the 154-pound division. So once he was in a condition to, be able to fight, y'all could have had something where you would have ordered the mandatory then, but they didn't do that. So That's why that whole situation seems weird in a sense from Virgil Ortiz's camp. But we're just gonna see what's gonna happen here for November 8th, and then after that, then you'll see what the move will be for Virgil Ortiz Jr. if he does score the win against Erickson Lubin on that front, man. Anything on that academic? Because I'm about to have a couple more announcements here, and then I'm gonna wrap things up.
Nothing else on moving Ortiz, no.
Word. All right, bet. So that is the situation there with Virgil Ortiz Jr. Other news that I kind of seen or stumbled on for this week is that the IBF lightweight title was put up for purse bid there, and it was won by Matchroom Boxing. So you have Ray Murataya there, and his mandatory challenger is Andy Cruz. They say that Andy Cruz will challenge for Ray Murataya's IBF lightweight title in early 2026. So that's one thing there that was in the news cycle for this week. The other thing that was on the news cycle for this week, as far as the IBF is concerned, is the IBF super welterweight title, which I mentioned, Bakram Murtazaliev. Now, Bakram Murtazaliev has been in conversations about potential fights against Boots Ennis or Surrey Boachuk at one point, and Erickson Lubin, as Erickson Lubin was initially his mandatory challenger, right? But it couldn't work out a deal, and that's why you see Virgil Ortiz fighting Erickson Lubin instead of Erickson Lubin fighting Bakram Murtazaliev. Now you had an instance where Bakram Murtazaliev had something scheduled with the purse bid for his next person that was in line, and that is Josh Kelly. And news came out here a couple days ago that the purse bid for that had been postponed, right? Because according to IBF rules, Josh Kelly is only scheduled to get 15% of the purse in comparison to Bakram Murtazaliev, who would get 85%. Now, wait a minute. I thought that there was supposed to be something scheduled between Bakram Murtazaliev and Josh Kelly for December. I thought it was posted in an article somewhere online. But as it seems here, hey, looks like that fight isn't necessarily locked down. And this is not much different than what happened here with Erickson Lubin. You got Erickson Lubin and Bakram Murtazaliev. They couldn't reach a deal. Now with Murtazaliev being with Main Events ain't got no dates. They ain't got no TV deal. So where's the money going to come from? So that's why you had Erickson Lubin go fight Virgil Ortiz Jr. instead. Golden Boy, DAZN. There you go. Josh Kelly, not much different. You had Josh Kelly fighting in Riyadh season events and all that type of stuff, getting good money. Why would he take 15% against a Bakram Murtazaliev who isn't really bringing that much money anyway? So there's people claiming that, folks are they're not, fighting Murtazaliev because they don't want to fight him and all that type of stuff. No, it's about the money. That's pretty much what it is. Prize fighting isn't necessarily about world titles. Prize fighting is about getting that money, as much money as you possibly can, while you fight or in particular fights. So Murtazaliev, you might have to look for another opponent that's down the line in the IBF rankings, because if Josh Kelly ain't taking 15% and you ain't getting that much money anyway, oh well, it is what it is. You might have to wait for one of these other world champions to potentially fight you in a unification. That's your only hope. So there you go on that front. But that's what I had here in this edition for the Boxing Source podcast. Shout out to the Boxing Academic for joining us here on this edition of the podcast. We're going to get back into it with the midweek report on Wednesdays. We got a number of interviews that are scheduled coming up. Of course, we have Tuesdays there, Real Boxing with Coach Ronnie Shields. This edition is going to be a special edition honoring the great trainer himself, Emmanuel Stewart. So we're going to have a special show there on Tuesday, midweek report on Wednesday, and we're going to see about scheduling some interviews here over the course of the week. And y'all check out conversations there with Nasheed Smith and Derek Scooter Davis that's on the YouTube channel. With that being said, y'all, I will catch y'all later. Peace out.